All right. So welcome everyone to our afternoon event. Thank you for joining us on a Thursday afternoon. We're excited here at the San Francisco Center for the Book to be hosting TJ Demos and Felicia Rice for our conversation, The Necropolitics of Extraction. My name's Jenny Hinchcliffe. I'm the events and exhibition manager here at the center, and I have a little bit of housekeeping that I'd like to do before we go ahead and get started. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and we'll go ahead and do this and this and this. All right. So, right. All right. So the San Francisco Center for the Book is pleased to welcome you to today's presentation. Should attendees have questions during the course of the presentation, please feel free to type them into Zoom's chat feature. We'll be holding all of the questions until the end of the presentation, but if anything occurs to you while the presenters are discussing the work that they'll be talking about today, you're welcome to go ahead and type those questions into the chat. Oops. I'd like to introduce TJ Demos. He is an award-winning writer and professor of visual culture at University of California, Santa Cruz, and director of its Center for Creative Ecologies. He writes widely about contemporary art, global politics, and ecology, and his published work centers broadly on the conjunction of art and politics, examining the ability of artistic practice to invent innovative and experimental strategies that challenge dominant social, political, and economic conventions. TJ is the author most recently of Beyond the World's End, Arts of Living at the Crossing, a Mellon-funded research project, art exhibition, film screening series, and book asking how radical cultural practice can transcend catastrophism and negativity and cultivate futures of social justice and ecological flourishing. Felicia Rice, our other presenter for this evening, is an artist, letterpress printer, publisher, and educator. In 1977, she set Moving Parts Press in motion, and with one foot firmly planted in the 19th century and the other in the 21st, she utilizes letterpress and digital technologies to produce limited edition artist books, prints, and broadsides in collaboration with visual and performing artists, writers, and philosophers. Work from Moving Parts Press is included in exhibitions and collections, both nationally and internationally, and has been the recipient of numerous awards and grants. Her entire letterpress shop and all of her work was destroyed by fire in the Santa Cruz Mountains in August of 2020. I believe she'll be talking about that in a little bit. Rice has relocated to her family home in Mendocino, and with the help of over 750 supporters and counting, she has begun to reestablish Moving Parts Press. So right now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hand the screen over to Felicia. She has a beautiful presentation that she would like to share with attendees this evening. And then she and TJ will move into conversation talking about the necropolitics of extraction. So I'm going to go ahead, Felicia, and I will do this and this and this, all of these little things to do. All right, so are you ready for me to play the video, Felicia?
Yeah, go ahead and play the video.
Okay, super, here we go. Okay. All right.
So welcome to the exhibit, Reclamation, Artist Books on the Environment, where the focus of this afternoon is the necropolitics of extraction, currently on display. And here you'll see a quick walkthrough of the exhibit at the San Francisco Center for the Book, the floor plan, the teaching presses, the workspace, and then the exhibition of books that are being shown in conjunction with another exhibition of this same work these works at the San Francisco Public Library. So thank you to the exhibition curators, Betty Bright and Jeff Thomas, and jurors, Betty Bright, Mark Dimination, and Ruth Rogers. Special thanks to you, Jenny Hinchcliffe of the Center, for managing the logistics and for the exhibition design, and to Mary Austin for loaning her copy of the book, one of the 10 surviving copies. Next. The Necropolitics of Extraction, a work lost to climate change. Next. In 1977, I founded Moving Parts Press in downtown Santa Cruz, where I entertained clients and authors, artists and students for over a decade before moving the press to the Santa Cruz Mountains. Please bear with me if you have heard this story before. My letterpress shop and my entire archive of artist books was destroyed in the CZU Lightning Complex fire in August 2020, just last summer. I've relocated to Mendocino, as Jenny said, and with the help of over 750 supporters, I am reestablishing Moving Parts Press in my childhood home. Next. Before the fire, my shop was located on a ridge above the Pacific Ocean. My studio was the ground floor of my home and fit me like a glove. Next. Over the course of 45 years, I had built a complete letterpress setup with a beautiful Victoria platen press and 2 Vandercook proof presses. I had a very fine collection of 200 cases of metal type of the highest quality, irreplaceable, inherited from the fine printer Sherwood Grover. Next. This is the view from the driveway after the fire took our home, along with the entire neighborhood. At least 20 houses plus outbuildings were destroyed. There is no question that the August fires, triggered by lightning strikes in the Santa Cruz Mountains, grew to the proportions of a true megafire. Megafires are characterized by their intensity, size, duration, and uncontrollable dimension. There is no precise scientific definition. The U.S. Forest Service data shows that megafires are 7 times more frequent in the West today and burn twice as much land as they did 40 years ago. The average fire season also lasts 2.5 months longer than it did in the 1970s. Next. This is what happens to a Vandercook proof press when it is subjected to a 1,000 to 2,000 degree house fire. Megafires are caused by global warming and are on the increase in California. A recent study from climate scientists at Stanford University has found that autumn days with extreme fire weather have more than doubled in California since the early 1980s due to climate change. Global warming has increased the frequency of extreme weather historically, suggesting that continued global warming will intensify these conditions further, as we've seen most recently in the Northwest. Next. 2 things I am thankful for are our safety and the fact that in 2018, the Moving Parts Press archive went to special collections at the UC Santa Barbara Library. So 1 of each of my print pieces through 2018 are tucked away where people can visit and see the work. Fortunately, my books are also collected widely. Next. The current home of Moving Parts Press in Mendocino is the 9 by 14 foot shed that my artist father used as his studio for 40 years. And like so many others, I am also working out of my bedroom office. Next. Due to the incredible generosity of many, many individuals and organizations, perhaps some of you, I've been able to pivot from scrambling for the very survival of the press to a dream of thriving in a new building. Plans for a modest studio to replace the existing shed are before the Mendocino Historical Review Board. My artist father submitted similar drawings for this building 40 years ago when he was just about my age, and they were approved but never realized. The permit process has dragged on for over 7 months, and meanwhile materials costs have risen stratospherically. A sheet of plywood I bought in October for $63 was $128 in mid-June, an increase of over 100%. I'm wondering if my dad didn't choose to tailor his work to the shed rather than be sidetracked by construction at this stage of life. But to contribute to this effort to raise Moving Parts Press from the ashes, please visit this GoFundMe page to donate to the rebuilding of the press in my new home. Next. In November, I printed these broadsides in the shed. The broadsides are dedicated to recovery from last summer's wildfires. They are available for sale at Bookshop Santa Cruz. All proceeds from the sale of the broadsides are being donated to aid in the recovery of the Santa Cruz community from the devastating wildfires in August. And the URL is in the chat. Next. The Necropolitics of Extraction. T.J. Demos, writer and environmental justice activist, and Craig Jensen, longtime collaborator and binder, worked with me to make this book. I had just finished producing it when the fire took everything. There are 10 copies remaining from an edition of 40. Next. The materials of the clamshell book box reflect our Zoom moment. The cover is a dark, animate rectangle of paper outlined by high visibility lime cloth, a color that protects against and calls attention to danger. Next. Opening the box reveals the book with high-vis orange tape running below the images. The stained lines in the crumpled brown paper and the gray smog printed from a rumpled t-shirt hover between the organic and the synthetic. Next. Our culture, our society is tilting toward the visual while retaining a place of respect for the written word. The layering textures and photographic images overprinted with degraded type allows for reading both visually and verbally and provides multiple entry points for the viewer. Next. In this accordion fold book, one long print commenting on the rapacious aspects of extraction resolves in a call to action with Demos's essay. The print depicts some of the most pressing problems of our time and then shows the faces of leading social, political, and environmental activists. Next. Capitalism's rapacious commodification of anything and everything. In his essay, Against Extraction, that fuels the book, TJ writes, extraction represents the violent transformation of life into capitalist commodities. It is a mode of necropolitics, the governance of the dead and dying, including the transformation of habitats into sacrifice zones, the relegation of populations to the worn out, used up, and debilitated, the conversion of life worlds into death worlds. Next. Complex causalities and effects of global extractivism. Next. Exploitative international trade agreements. Next. Finances of debt servitude. Next. Sacrifice zones given over to resource mining. Next. Then an opening, emancipation and decolonization. Next. And movement building and solidarity with those on the front lines of opposition. Greta Thunberg, Emma Gonzalez, Malala, Robert Bullard, Berta Cáceres, Tom B.K. Goldtooth, Wangari Maathai. Next. Finally, to make the impossible gradually possible, there is no other choice. The essay closes with this call to action. The greatest urgency is to build social movements of mutual aid and collective organizing dedicated to a shared political project of justice and radical equality on the basis of solidarity, the political form of belonging most opposed to relations of extraction. Next. A quick walk through the process of making this book. I knew I wanted to work with two elements from earlier works, Dock on Dock from 2014 on the right and Border Bus from 2019 on the left, the accordion fold structure and the use of this fingerprint on every page. Next. So I loosely tried out ideas on the press and then on my idea wall, in this case, floor. Next. 8 sheets were hinged together to make up the accordion fold book. The book folds down to 9 by 11.5 inches and extends to just over 17 feet. My first 2 press runs on each of the page spreads were a rainbow roll of yellows and blues, blending to form greens. The third run, the oversized fingerprint. Next. I next added the smog from relief surfaces built from a t-shirt painted with varnish. Next. The flow of photographic images were culled from the web and manipulated in Photoshop, and I actually took 1 or 2 of them myself. And this created a landscape, next, of oil rigs and derricks, mining operations and excavators, corporate logos. Next. As a printer, my job is to confront complex issues and render my response in book form. Next. As a publisher, my job is to make these issues public. Next. As an artist, my job is to do so with profound integrity. Next. As printers have done every decade since Gutenberg, I'm here to argue for a more just society. Next. Next, I added the faces of the 7 activists in a transparent gray. Next. Printed from polymer plates. Next. But then I decided they needed to be stronger and overprinted them in black. Next. While building a print, I am feeling my way, experimenting and rectifying missteps as I go along. Next. I pressure printed fluorescent orange gas onto each page using cotton batting. Next. The cotton batting is laid under the sheet and pulls color off a tie-pie plate in the bed of the press. Next. It's a lumpy, loose, satisfying, and very frustrating process. No print is the same. Next. Next. In the summer of 2019, I was a visiting artist with Art Dialogue at the Art Mill in the Czech Republic. The Art Mill is located 2 hours outside of Prague in the countryside in southwestern Bohemia. Next. I was given studio space in the loft of a beautiful stone barn open to the elements. I brought my stash of ancient transfer type along with me to create word bombs for this book. Dry transfer type, popular from the 1960s to the 80s, revolutionized graphic design. Next. 40 years later, the original Letraset, Zipatone, and format types were barely usable as their polymer-based materials had hardened. Next. The degraded types suggest the deterioration, the ultimate and inevitable destruction of civilization as we know it. Next. It references our lack of foresight in developing products that are safe and durable over time. Next. We're in a free fall, showered with cracking plastic bits. Next. And then we'll just run through these quickly. Next. 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 Once home, I scanned the raw material and laid it out in relation to the printed pages. Next. Next. We'll do a few. Next. 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 As you have seen, the type and images were largely printed from photopolymer plates. I bought a polymer plate maker in 2019. I called it my Easy Bake Oven. I would expose a light-sensitive polymer plate using negatives produced on my office laser printer, wash out the unexposed area of the plates with water, and slap the finished plates right on a magnetic base in the bed of the press. But I had become concerned about the impact on the environment of the warm washout water charged with plastic nanoparticles. And I am now the proud owner of a laser cutter for plate making, having lost a polymer plate maker in a fire. Next. The high-vis orange tape below the images runs the full length of the book. Next. It unites the elements of the extended 17-foot print. Next. It shouts the phrases taken from Demos's writings, like a chyron beneath the evening news. Next. Next. Craig Jensen has been binding Moving Parts Press books at Book Lab 2 in San Marcos, Texas for over 15 years, beginning with Cosmogony and Team in 2005. Next. I depend on Craig's years of experience and broad knowledge of book structures and housing construction, fine materials, and efficient, high-quality hand workmanship. We work in close collaboration. Next. My choice of materials does not make his work easy, and this project was particularly demanding. Next. The clamshell box is covered in handmade cave paper. The paper had a mind of its own and speaks for the organic living world in this project. Next. The calendar here shows March 2020. Seems like a lifetime ago. Next. I had planned to hand color 10 copies to heighten the atmospheric of each page spread, bringing out the dark and the light aspects of the images moving through the book. Only 3 copies were completed. Next. The Necropolitics of Extraction appears in the catalog and exhibition guide for the Codex Foundation project, Extraction, Art on the Edge of the Abyss. Next. The book is my contribution to this project. I intended to donate 10% of the proceeds from book sales to support organizations working for environmental justice. I have been doing this with each of my recent publications. Next. In the making of fine books, we consider the life of the object, using archival materials and techniques to ensure the stable condition of the edition over time. Making this type of book is a reaching out to the future, a statement of belief in a future. The fingerprint and spreading oak tree speak to the healing properties of time in the natural world. The blues and grays turn to yellows and greens, from darkness to light, from despair to hope. What comes after the end of the world? And how can we cultivate futures of social justice with capitalist ruins? The book closes with a statement: to make the impossible gradually possible, there is no other choice. It describes a closing, but offers an opening as well into an unknown world on the verge of revealing itself through our collective imaginations. Thank you.
Thank you, Felicia. I'm going to stop sharing and come back. All right. Thank you so much for that incredible and also informative presentation. And I'm sure that, you know, as we move through the rest of the conversation, people will have questions. If you have any questions right now, I would encourage the audience to go ahead and type them into the chat. As I mentioned, we will hold questions until the end of the presentation. But now I'm actually going to go ahead and hand things over to both Felicia and TJ. They have questions and conversation that they are interested in discussing with each other. And so I look forward to hearing what they have to say. So welcome, TJ. Welcome, Felicia.
Well, I just want to jump in and say what a great opportunity this is for TJ and I to have this conversation with one another. There hasn't been much time. There's been a lot of disruption in our lives. And we really, the book was completed and then the world turned upside down. And it actually was completed while it was already upside down, and it's been upside down for some years. So I'm just glad for this half hour or so to spend time together. And I'm really interested in just starting off with anything, TJ, you might want to say about our collaborative process or about what emerged from it or your sense of this.
Yeah, thanks, Felicia. And first off, I'd like to say thank you to Jenny and also to the San Francisco Center for the book for putting this discussion together. Thanks, Felicia, for the invitation, and also the invitation to this whole project, which really, as you've just presented, has been so, I don't know, complex and amazing in many ways, and really difficult in others, especially with the way the book was made and died in some ways, although a few copies survived through the fires of last year. So I was really interested in the presentation and to hear more about your own process of making it, and the way that you presented the book and the design as a kind of, especially with the high-vis orange tape, almost like I was thinking as I was listening to you, it's almost as if the book is the scene of a crime or a disaster zone. And indeed, that's how I would think of this extractive zone, is something that is really very negative and actually criminal, especially the more that we hear about how major oil companies internationally have for decades denied their participation in disastrous climate change. And indeed, there's more and more articles coming out and analysis and social justice movements of activism that are calling it what it is, basically a kind of criminally produced situation of global climate breakdown. But I was also interested in hearing your discussion about how the book is also a conflict of materials and representational systems that isn't simply negative, but also has the materials of life built within it. And so in that sense, it's not simply a negative response to something that is definitely negative. I mean, necropolitics is itself a very kind of nasty term when we're thinking about the politics of death ultimately, or the politics of the way in which death is politicized. But to think about how that can lead ultimately to a resurgence of forms of life through collective practice, through activism and environmentalism, as well as through the kind of question of how we can develop and cultivate non-extractive forms of life. I think that was also really important that comes across in the book. It's always been important to my work as a researcher. I often find myself focusing on things that are very negative because indeed there's stuff happening in the world that is very negative, but I think it's really crucial and politically enabling to argue for possibility ultimately, that this isn't a done deal. We're not faced with fatalism or nihilism. There are things that we can still do about this, and I'm really happy that the book emphasized that positive element.
I've been reading your book, Beyond the World's End, new book, Arts of Living at the Crossing. And I think this is such an important, it's a powerful work. It's really calling on various activist artists around the globe who are working on issues within their communities or worldwide global issues, and how they're working on them. So that's just interesting in itself, how artists are responding and what are they offering, and how are they forwarding the conversation about these issues. And then just the title, Beyond the World's End, the idea that there is more coming, and what is that, and through working with you, I spent quite a bit of time thinking about what is it to imagine. Is that sort of a first step? We talk, many people talk about that, we must conceive of what we're going to build, on the other side, beyond the world's end. So I hardly recommend this book to anyone who's interested in this issue. Just an interesting cross-section between fine art, politics, and then TJ, you do such a good job of describing the issues themselves that are being addressed by the artists. So you really get a good view of all that's going on out there on many levels.
Thanks very much. It's always been an important part of my practice in writing to look for creative speculative thinking that's happening not only by philosophers and theorists, but also by artists. Also not simply in terms of conceptual proposals, but actually how speculative creative thinking can be stimulated through practice, by making artwork, by making images or representations, or through all sorts of collaborative performative engagements. So that's really the book is a continuation in many ways of finding really urgent, valuable, compelling resources within the art world,
and building community, creating new community around the practices that are critical to the art making. So people are walking the talk, putting themselves out on the line as they're developing ZAD in France, or yeah, I'm trying to think of the other example, but the point for me was just how, Standing Rock.
Yeah. So maybe I should say a little bit about that. The ZAD is it's the largest autonomous zone in Europe right now. It's it's a large part of an area of central France where people are dedicated to attempting to live basically beyond the conditions of dominant economic arrangements and capitalist forms of extraction, really. So it's a very hopeful, even utopian context where people are yet attempting to live the utopia rather than simply imagine it. And that was the case also with Standing Rock, and the book actually has a big investment with, in terms of looking at indigenous philosophies and indigenous practices, including artistic practices. Not that the struggle against the Dakota Access Pipeline was could be reduced to an artwork or be even described as artistic. Yet on the other hand, there were really interesting aspects of the most possibly ambitious way to consider what art is as a world building practice within the conditions of that Standing Rock resistance. So that's one thing that that's one of the ambitions of my book, is to look at all sorts of different kinds of artistic engagements, not only the more conventional types of formats like books or photographs or videos, but actually forms of actually building new ways of living otherwise. And that is part of what I see as a moment of crossing into a future that could be nearly unrecognizable to what we're used to in the present.
Yeah, really opening up to those possibilities seems important. We, living through the 60s as a child and among the Northern California commune builders, and having seen a lot of things just dwindle, just sort of fizzle out. Ooh, I hope no Mendocino people are listening to this. Still, it's important not to be not to give up on the ideas and the real powerful intent that came to the stepping away from, the dropping out, the making decision to do things in a different way, and for some of that to be coming back in another around in subsequent generations is just really enheartening. It's living, it lives among us, the utopian, the imaginative, the dreaming for a better life. And it's so important to share that with one another and express it. And that's where the art seems to come in. The impulse to make art is very, very basic, very real, and also the impulse to imagine a better world. And
yeah, so that was in a way the origins of my essay that you used for the basis of your book project, which was an essay that is a chapter in that book, Beyond the World's End, which was looking at different geopolitical contexts and the way different artists have dealt with those contexts, which are very much shaped by violent forms of extraction, whether it's gold mining, for instance, in contemporary Greece, in the Halkidiki Peninsula, or in the Canadian tar sands, and the way that the tar sands project, which is one of the biggest surface mining projects on Earth, is affecting faraway places like rising seas that are threatening the coasts of Bangladesh, and the current context of Puerto Rico in relationship to colonial indebtedness and US Puerto Rican relations and the history. So these all come up in artworks like the work of Angela Melitopoulos and Ursula Biman and Alora and Calzadia, who are Puerto Rican artists, that I deal with in that book chapter. So it's interesting for me to see how you yourself drew on that and found inspiration in that work to create a book that was subsequent to my own research. So all this stuff is entangled, which I really love, and also to see how things can be can find echoes and resonances and become amplified in different spaces and different practices. So, you know, the book that Felicia made, The Necropolitics of Extraction, comes out of really multiple collaborations internationally, politically, artistically, and also finally with the work that Felicia did in relationship to my text.
Yeah, yeah. And when you talk about forms or media, I was interested to think about the use of video and photography in the work that's being made. I mean, like that I think you make the point that this is one of the dominant forms in the new work that's being done. And I know when you see that slide of me crouched down with my wall of photos, I'm really exploiting the tool that the internet has presented us with to gather and cull through and find. It's just this incredible well of information, visual information, and I like to bring that into my work. I really want to see my own hand in the work, and in this book it took the form of all the crackly letters and my hand in there scratching away on them to create the letter forms. Sometimes I incorporate my own drawings, and that's important to me, so that I'm revealed. I think it's really important that the artist doesn't stand too far behind the medium that they're, at least for me, at this point in my life, super important not to hide behind craft or media form, but to really shine through. And since I was raised by two artists who were abstract expressionists, and any young art student you know now, that was them. They met in New York in art school in their 20s and went on to have a life in art and raise a family and come to California and establish something here, living minimally. And and so the abstract expressionism comes really strongly to me. I mean, I was steeped in it. So the hand, the energy, expressing motion or expressing the energy that we are, you know, feels just critical to me. So that is one of the things you might see in my work. And you work with other artists, activists who are working with video. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point that you're bringing up in terms of an artist's relationship to media or different mediums of practice. And certainly in my work, I look at a lot of artists who are using photography and video. And that's something that, for whatever reason, I'm drawn to and find really compelling formulations of aesthetic proposals within those mediums that can deal with some of the complexity, for instance, of extraction or of the stuff in relationship to climate breakdown and political ecology that I'm interested in dealing with in my current work. But that's not to say that, you know, that there's any number of ways to do this and to engage with aesthetic processes. And certainly, I think it's an interesting point that you're making, at least how I'm interpreting it, which is that to somehow retain the artist's hand in the work, to have a basis in craft, not completely, because as you're saying, you're still reliant on internet archives of imagery and drawing on the digital economy in many ways. Yet there's this important element of putting yourself into the work, and I think that's an important element of proposing a kind of non-alienated artistic labor as the basis of art making, which is indeed, that's important in a significant way that we can think about our relation to the world as being, non-extractive. Not that there's a simple correlation between a medium and an extractive dynamic, but certainly the desire that comes out of, for instance, abstract expressionism of the artist to be in the work, to be part of it, to have that creative connection to it, is something that was, I think a lot of people talk about in terms of being a way to resist the kinds of dominant, alienating, objectifying experiences of relationality within, for instance, capitalism.
Yeah, commodification of anything and everything. Rapacious, you know, I just love that language, and speaks so loudly to how we experience every day. So there's this heavily mediated experience coming through these forms of video, photography, TV, movies, you know, heavily mediated. And then on the other hand, there's this grabbing a hold and participating in those media environments. So, you know, I did manage the Digital Art and New Media MFA program at UCSC from its inception for 13 years. And I really came to so appreciate, I think I already did, but I really appreciated the role of technologies and how we see and how we express ourselves, and how different people take those same tools and do different things. So the students had a range of tools, and they did a range of things. And I brought that into my work as well with my Doc and Doc project, the electronic case with music and video by Gomez Peña and Gustavo Vazquez and Zachary Watkins, and really important figure in that was Peter Elsie, who ran the Electronic Music Lab forever, like 35 years, built it. And he was the brains behind making that whole thing work. You know, the right little computer brain in there and the right little amplifiers and everything. And so I love being involved in those tools. And I see this book. This I think is interesting. Where does this book go? I'm a publisher. I'm not interested in there are 10 copies. Too bad that's the end. There's a master copy. We have a copy. You know, what can we do with it to get it out into the world? And so I feel a strong responsibility as a publisher to see my work go out. So when I talk about making public, that's what I mean. I wear these 3 hats. And so I'm very interested in where this book might go. We can reproduce it in a simple paper copy. Again, it's a book, it's a codex, or it could be loaded easily onto my website and made available through a series of slides or a video, very nice video. So do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I hope it can travel, even in its limited form. But I think it's interesting to think of like a digital codex and ways that the book could travel online digitally in the absence of its physical status owing to the destruction of the fires. Yeah, I suspect that would be not totally satisfying, because, you know, the physicality, the corporeality of the book is such an important, the smell of the book is such an important element of engaging with it in a multi-sensory way, not just visually on a screen. But that is something. At least it could possibly travel and enter into different sites of reception that way.
I love the idea of projecting it. So what if you don't have the access to the internet? Maybe you didn't get one of the books, but you're walking along and you pass a projection of the book that's part of performance. You know, like the right confluence of performance artists and the imagery might take over a stage or a sidewalk or an event of some sort. So my ears are to the ground, you know, as to whether someone might come along who'd like to pick up this and carry it further. And you might be the link, because this is your work and you travel the world. You might run into somebody who'd
I'll let you know if I do.
Yeah. So let's see. Do we want to just look at the questions to see if we can, because there's a small group of people, maybe we can have more, broaden the conversation.
Certainly, yeah, a few questions have come in. Let's see, so Barbara is interested in hearing from Felicia. Do the particulars of Mendocino give you project ideas that are different from what you might have imagined in Santa Cruz?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the natural world is just so present here. It's staggeringly beautiful. So healing, very healing, and very much a part of the next work that I'm working on right now, developing and trying to start to print if I could only get a stable workspace going. So yeah, definitely influence and impacting me.
And then for TJ, Jeff was interested in hearing more about the French autonomous community and how that might compare to what was going on in Seattle last year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's similarities, and in fact, I know some of the people who are on the ZOD in France, and they were very interested and followed closely what was happening in Seattle. I think the difference is that Seattle didn't last. It wasn't a permanent site of reclamation, despite maybe some people wanting to make it that. But the ZOD has continued. It goes back a couple of decades. The ZAD, Z-A-D, stands for the Zone to Defend, or the Zone à Défendre in French. And it originated in a project of a group of environmental activists and farmers and artists attempting to stop an airport construction project in that area of France. So they were defending the land against the expansion of, say, fossil fuel infrastructure and the destructive transportation economy. And that's successfully translated into something else beyond just a protest. It really became a site of world building where they're trying. I visited it. It's an amazing place where they're actually trying to, as much as possible, live according to a degrowth solidarity economy that's based on participatory democracy and political inclusivity, and attempting to live with a small footprint on the earth. And that's definitely, they have all sorts of challenges, but they're very committed to this. And their slogan is "ZODs everywhere." Like we need to, if anything, expand this. And in some ways, Felicia was mentioning a relationship to the '60s and the communal movement back then. In some ways, the ZOD is a continuation of that. It doesn't have some of the dangers, say, of the charismatic leader and the cultish social composition and the perpetuation of patriarchy and some of the things that you found within at least some of the commune experiments, but it's a continuation of that radical energy of people getting together and deciding to live otherwise, and for that it's extremely inspirational. And I put it in connection with some of the indigenous land back movements that we're seeing recently in the Americas and States and in Canada, that are similarly attempting to try to shut down the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure and pipelines, and assert a different, try to build another world where it can also be based on decolonization, something that is beyond the economic terms of capitalism, and within indigenous language, attempting to reestablish what many indigenous peoples call correct relations or right relations. The relationality that is not extractive, but it's about participation and membership within the sustainability of the biodiverse web of life. That's really ultimately what many indigenous philosophers, like Robin Kimmerer, for instance, who's an amazing writer and researcher, talk about so often.
I was thinking about some of what you've been writing about solidarity, movement building, this kind of idea, the ZOD, Standing Rock, this eruption of multiple communities building around some basic common shared ideas, but that spontaneously erupt all over, that this is part of the end of capitalism, is that more and more to see some of this community building is what the word comes for me. around the globe. And it's actually super, it's so exciting to imagine that more and more of this will happen in response to the erosion of our communities. We see that in Santa Cruz with the fires, that people are struggling to rebuild, and against all, the bureaucracy of building will make it almost impossible for people to maintain their efforts over time. I'm dealing with that here in Mendocino County with the planning and building services, and the small space that I want to construct on the footprint of a plan that was approved by my father's 40 years ago is creating nothing. I mean, they'll find every reason to stonewall, and I got an email from the county office in Santa Cruz saying, we're here to support people going through this process. We're here to, and I felt, well, even if this is all, gobbledygook, they're telling us they'll support us, but in fact, it's still horrific. At least somebody is saying, we're aware that you're trying to recover. We're aware that this is all horrible. But there's nothing here like that. There's no support. It's the opposite. My story is emotional. We're talking about policies and procedures, so it's almost, my story is dismissed in those offices. And I don't think that's how we build new communities. I don't think that's how steeped in bureaucracy at UC Santa Cruz for almost 25 years, I'm a pretty good bureaucrat, but I know that when someone comes in from outside, the job of a very good bureaucrat is to say, we hear you, and your case is wending its way through the nightmare here, and I'm aware of what's going on, and I'm following it. You'll hear from me, some human contact. So there's plenty of examples of where there isn't human contact, but I love hearing about, and I've always been interested, regardless of, maybe because I grew up in the environment I did, but I'm always interested in utopian efforts, and they go back, in our country into the 19th century with some really interesting things.
Yeah, well, what you're talking about is some really fundamental challenges that are upon us right now, especially with the recurrence of these disastrous fires, and what happens in the aftermath. How can the aftermath be a process of caretaking and social justice and repair, instead of, for instance, making more possibilities for what some call, like Naomi Klein, disaster capitalism, or allowing the real estate industry to make more money instead of building housing that people actually need, that's affordable and sustainable. I think we're going to be faced with just enormous problems, and we can already see them. For instance, Naomi Klein wrote an essay on Chico, California, in the aftermath of the fire, and just how devastating that disaster has been, and not for natural reasons, but actually for political ones and economic ones. So I think that we have a lot to deal with, and I think whatever we can do to start this, reestablishing the conditions of accountability, responsibility, and ethical relationality in our politics, which I know is exactly not where politics is going these days, but if we can begin to recover that, that's what's really necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have time for one more question?
Of course.
Okay, Sam has a fantastic question, which is, what do you both consider to be the role of art in creating social change? Is art primarily a tool for bearing witness to injustice, a tool of persuasion and consensus building, or can it cause political change in some other more direct way?
Felicia, you want to go first?
Oh, well, I would say it's all of those things, that we need to be working on all of those fronts, plus a whole bunch of other ones. I feel that, you know, the impulse to make, to create, to imagine is part of the human condition, and that it's been a contributing factor in human society for forever. And we just need to continue. And anyone who senses in themselves that they have something to throw into the pot, that they have something to make, that they have a statement that they want to support or come together with others to support, should be doing it, and doing it now.
Yeah, I would just add on to that a couple ways of thinking about art that might not be so familiar to some people. One is art as a kind of forensic investigative aesthetics. Something that can actually produce evidence, say about environmental crime or state violence, and bring it before courts of law. That's something that groups like Forensic Architecture, which is based in London, is actually doing. And there's lots of artists and artist organizations who are attempting to develop that kind of critical forensic investigative practice on the one hand. On the other, there's, I loved the way someone like Leanne Simpson, who's an indigenous thinker, talks about art within an indigenous framework, where she compares art within capitalist Enlightenment modernity as a kind of, all too often it's relegated to a hobby or a specific professional specialization. Whereas for Leanne Simpson, it's something that everyone participates in on a daily basis. It's part of the human creativity of creating new worlds, of building new worlds, that's always happening. And I think that's really a capacious way of thinking about it. So art, most fundamentally, is about imagining a new world and also beginning to realize it.
Nice, nice. I like that a lot. Do we have any more questions?
No more. And I feel
Okay,
like
that's perfect.
that is a really beautiful place to sort of to wrap up. Thank you both so much, so much for not only the conversation, but for the work that you do, the art, the writing, the authorship, and just also helping us think about, you know, the intersections that are being created. And also, as we've been talking about, the communities that we can build to help move beyond this sort of doomsday thinking. So thank you both so much.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks,
Yeah.
Felicia.
Thank you, TJ.